or comments or areas I can improve this. Feedback.
I actually have a question when you're talking about indexicality. So we're a native English speaker and you purposely boldly mispronounce English in order to be funny or make a joke of some sort. Is that the same kind of event?
See, I think not, because I don't think there's, I think that's exactly the sort of thing Hill is talking about, but it's not, the folk understanding is that the thing exists in, that the meaning and the negativity exists in the word or the actual act, but it's the implications of it. So if I boldly mispronounce received pronunciation, and I'm making fun of the British, I'm sorry, but you don't have any difficulty getting a job or accumulating wealth. You're not going to be imprisoned for driving while, you're not going to be pulled over for driving while British. So yes, you can, I think, and I do this with Southern all the time. I'll boldly mispronounce so I can point out that this form of English that I speak is associated with smartness. I can talk like this, and if I come into the room and I talk like this, one, you're going to think I might be a racist, and two, you're going to wonder if I really do have a PhD, because people who talk like this do not have PhDs. This is not what a PhD sounds like. This is something else, but it is not what a PhD sounds like. And if I came in here talking like this, and I never talked like my normal self, you might, in fact, begin to question my authority and my capacity to know a darn thing. Yes?
I think because you said feedback, I think this is really clever. Like if you did this in the beginning, then talked that way the entire time, and then like at the end you do, like at the end of the presentation, and then you switch back to the normal way you talk. I think you really make a statement.
I've got to get better at that accent. I think I need to practice it for longer than.
You'd be really nice.
But I mean, Larry the Cable Guy does this the opposite direction, right? You're familiar with the comedian Larry the Cable Guy? Who is, well, used to be an insult comic. His dialect of American English is my dialect, except it's an East Coast. He's kind of got an East Coast American English. And he was an insult comic. And you can find tape of him out on YouTube from before he invented Larry the Cable Guy, when he was doing insult comedy in East Coast middle class white. And then he invented Larry the Cable Guy and became rich. But he never slips. He never slips. Because he doesn't dare, because part of his shtick is that he's authentic. And plenty of folks who are his fans believe him to be a member of the rural working class, even though that is a complete fallacy. He's this East Coast insult comic who is also very good with dialect. And the insult comedy was awful. I watched the tape. It's one of those, it's one of those ones where some people laugh at that stuff, but I have no idea why. Insulting his wife, insulting his mother, that kind of stuff. Just that nasty, mean-spirited insultness. But in his character as Larry the Cable Guy, he still does insult comedy. He does insult comedy against the people he is pretending to be one of. And they laugh, because it's so funny. But if they knew he was some East Coast guy, if he did it in his regular voice, they'd be furious with him. But because he does it in his Larry the Cable Guy voice, in his persona, they laugh. The redneck comedy. Language is interesting. But yeah, you think you can, so with that, he does bold mispronunciation and all sorts of good stuff. And he gets away with it. And I don't think that it's necessarily racist. Maybe classist.
Yeah, I'm saying class shows up.
It's classist, yeah. And we need to think about that too. The same structures that are about race are about, there's the same sort of structural thing.
That very thing to me ties into the fact that he can get away with that because people listening to him see his authority on it because of the accent that he has. Which makes me think of the fact that people at Western would not teach a class on Ebonics the way they teach a class on French Canadian dialect. They teach it as a language, because they don't have any teachers that they feel would feel comfortable teaching it because they aren't technically an authority. And that is surprising to me because I wonder if there will be a class, like we have African American studies, but do we teach African American vernacular the way we teach another language, the way we teach French Canadian?
Right. I think we desperately need somebody who's fluent. I mean, the person who teaches French Canadian is herself a Canadian
But she,
from Francophone Canada.
she is, but she had to learn the dialect. I took her class and she told me she had to learn
This is true.
the dialect. So, I mean, she's an authority as much as any authority would be to teach it. So as a student, you accept her, but you don't have to have been born into that culture to teach it, right? Like,
Right.
you know, we have.
Absolutely.
So, but
If I could
does
find
it
a
make
place-
everyone cringe to think of someone who's not born into it teaching it?
Right. Would it look like, I mean, my fear, you know, I'm thinking, man, I want to take a class to have the authority, because I teach about, you know, so I'll teach about the copula and I'll teach about, but I'll teach in a very small space, because I would feel otherwise this discomfort about appropriation. That how dare I be an authority on this language and appropriate the opportunity to be an authority on the language from somebody who, you know, from someone who will be praised for their articulateness.
Yeah.
You know, there's, Samuel Leem has this, who's another linguistic anthropologist, has this really lovely book called Articulate While Black, where he points out that, you know, nobody ever says to me, oh my goodness, how articulate you are, just as a matter of, you know, but you can hear people say this about Barack Obama. Like, he's a Harvard professor of constitutional law. Why would he not be articulate? So I would worry about that. But at the same time, I think if there were a community of folks who were interested in it and I could find a way to study it, I would certainly want to teach it. I think it would be cool. I just don't know where I could go to properly learn. And there's also, it's interesting, there's a very fascinating article that William Love has written about African American vernacular as an endangered language, where he makes the argument that he would like to see it actually disappear. He's the one who said it's a language, right? But he feels now that it's the social and economic structural isolation of speakers that keeps the language alive. And so, in his opinion, if you can rid our society of the structural and economic barriers, the language, like other minority languages, will probably die. As and he makes the argument that if you try and keep it alive, you're trying to keep the structures of inequity alive. And so it's a kind of a weirdly nuanced understanding of how the thing works. I'm not sure I agree. I think that we can be multilingual. There's a strong monolingualist element to our language ideology as well, which keeps coming into play here. The idea that everybody has one language and that being monolingual is a normal thing. And instead of perceiving monolingual people as somewhat handicapped and deprived, which, you know, in other places of the world, the place where I do my fieldwork, the idea of only speaking one language, it's like, you poor, pathetic, deprived person. You know, but for us, it's normal. And so that comes into play. Yeah, I think it is fraught with difficulty, and I would be happy to give it a shot. And face the slings and arrows. I think you could see some pretty serious, immediate political consequences, but I think that they are worth taking. And if anybody can take it, it's us. You know, if anybody should be getting hit in this, it's me. You know, white tenured professor. I think I get to be the target. So I'm finding somebody I can learn from.
I don't know anybody, but maybe you would assume.
I will try and find somebody.
How many authorities on
That was bad. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know some authorities, but I don't know who anybody's teaching.
It would be incredible to see it taught as a language. because to me personally, the term Ebonics seems archaic already.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't, we never put it on.
No, I know.
The Oakland School Board did that. Bless their hearts. They were wonderful, the great intentions, and every linguist I know just sit there and, because we already had terms. And it was being taught in some of the California school system as a language in bilingual education, which is what they wanted, right? They wanted it to be part of your bilingual education, that you would learn both what they called Ebonics and Standard American English, and that you would get federal funding the same way you would for Spanish speakers or Haitian Creole speakers or whatever. You would get federal funding to support bilingual education. And some of the people who really objected to that were quite prominent African Americans. Oprah Winfrey came out vigorously against it. Let's not teach our kids slang. We want them to grow up speaking correctly. Bill Cosby came out vigorously against it. Spokespeople for African Americans in the mainstream media came out in unity against the idea, which was disheartening for those of us who thought it was a great idea. We can keep plugging away at this, and plugging away at this makes a difference. It really does. And it's all you can do. And you can't, all you can do is just keep chipping away at it. Everybody looks determined. Determined. Very serious and determined. It is 6:30. I know people have work and transportation and things like that perhaps you need to go to, but I will be hanging out for a little while. And so if you want to come talk to me, it'll be awesome.